What's up, people of the internet? My name is Davicap, and we have a bunch of new cards to go over, including what might be the strongest green hero in the game, so stay tuned. Alright, so first off, if my green screen's acting kind of weird, that's because I'm moving and I had to pack up some of my equipment, like my lighting, so I apologize for that. I know I've seen a couple of people complain about it, but anyways, let's get into the cards. So first off, we have two new heroes revealed, the first being Drow Ranger. She's a 4/7 with the passive Other Allies in all lanes have +1 attack, and her premier card is Gust. 4 mana, silence enemy heroes this round. Now, let me just say right off the bat, this card is incredibly powerful. So the only thing that she doesn't have going for her is her body. She has definitely one of the weaker green bodies, but even then, not by much. She still outclasses blue heroes by a mile, and she's not really falling behind green heroes by that much. I mean, compared to like Viper, who's kind of a sucky hero, she only is losing like 3 health. But her passive is spectacular. +1 attack on all allies is insane. That's so much extra damage, both into enemy creeps and into towers. This makes her an absolute must-have for swarmy decks that like to have very wide boards. The only real flaw with it, and even then this is kind of a minor flaw, is that it's not going to make any difference in melee creep versus melee creep fights. So if you've got, your 3 attack melee creep versus their 2 attack melee creep, then they're still going to kill each other over 2 turns, so it won't make that much of a difference. But it's going to help in every other scenario. Getting tower damage, securing creep kills, securing hero kills, just winning combat in general. It's an incredibly useful passive. Plus, it's one of the very few cross lane passives that we know of. So just having, like, you could put Drow Ranger in lane 3, and then before the enemy even has a chance to deal with her, you've benefited from her passive in lane 1 and in lane 2, which makes her such a pain in the butt. Kind of like Crystal Maid in that sense. You don't need Crystal Maid in lane 1 or 2 to get the effects. You just stick her in lane 3 and then just benefit from her for the rest of the game. And on top of that, her premier card is fantastic, silencing every single enemy hero for just 4 mana. I mean, we can directly compare this to Truth to Power, which is objectively worse in every way. First of all, Truth to Power is more expensive. Secondly, it only affects 1 hero. So Gust affects every single enemy hero. So if you've got initiative, you just throw out Gust, and then you can do whatever you want for the rest of the turn because the enemy can't do anything except for play item cards. So just Drow Ranger, I think she's going to be a staple in a lot of decks. I think she's extremely powerful. She's in the running for probably one of the strongest heroes in the entire game at the moment, just because there isn't much wrong with her except for, of course, her low health. But I mean, her body's not that bad. Plus, speaking of her body, she really looks like Rihanna, don't you think? I've heard people on Reddit talk about it and on Twitter, and I really agree. She really looks like Rihanna. I think maybe the artist must have looked at a picture of that singer before he drew her or something. I don't know. All right, next up is Sven, a red hero. Now, we've seen his body and his passive before, but we're finally learning about his premier card, God's Strength. This is a 6 mana, modify a red hero with +4 attack. So, I mean, right off the bat, it's okay. It's not the worst premier card in the world. I'm looking at you, Fighting Instinct. But, I mean, +4 attack, I mean, that's pretty useful. It combos very well with Cleave. If you use it on Sven, it's sort of like thinking modify a red hero with +4 attack and +2 Cleave, which could be quite useful. But I think the thing with Sven is that most of the value goes into his very strong body and very strong stat. And red premier cards tend to be not quite as strong. So I think this kind of falls into that formula. His premier card is really expensive and the effect is good. It's just really overcosted. So I think Sven has some potential. Luckily, attack is one of those things where you can just never go wrong with more attack. I mean, it's not like block. After you hit a certain amount of block, you don't really care if you go any higher. Or health. After you hit a certain amount of health, I mean, if the enemy just can't kill you, they just can't kill you. Who needs 500 health? Because they're not going to deal 100 points of health anyways. But attack, you can always have more attack, because more attack means more tower pressure, means more creep kills, more hero kills. You just can't go wrong with it. So Sven, he's got potential to be a somewhat decent hero. I just wish this card was a little bit cheaper. Next up is Cheating Death. I feel like this card is going to piss off a bunch of people. 5 mana improvement. If there's an allied green hero in this lane, allies have a 50% chance of surviving with 1 health when they would die. So that applies to heroes, that applies to creeps. Essentially, if they die, there's a coin toss, and if it comes up in your favor, they survive with 1 health, which is really sucky for the opponent because that means there's 1 extra block, there's extra damage on the board. And you know, green's so good at healing. If you put out, you know, Enchantress, then not only will they not die, but they're also going to be healing. You know what I mean? Omni-Knight. There's just so many options for green to heal that just 1 health will very quickly snowball into 4 health, 5 health, and they'll be up to full before you know it. So this card, plus it's memey. It's gonna piss a lot of people off. RNG, for better or worse, is an artifact, and you're just gonna have to live with it. I can see this comboing really, really well with any sort of card that has Death Shield, because that means you have to win the coin toss to kill the unit, and then even if you do win the coin toss, they lose the Death Shield and come back with 1 health, and then you have to kill them again, and then you get another coin toss. So you can just keep smacking into a unit over and over and over and over, and they just don't die between the coin toss and the Death Shield. So Cheating Death, I feel like, is going to be a popular card, not necessarily because it's good, but because it's funny, and it's just going to piss off so many people. Next up, Defend the Weak, a 2-cost green card. Modify a unit with this unit's allied neighbors have +2 armor. So basically for 2 mana, you're gaining Treant Protector's passive. You're probably going to want to cast this on heroes as much as possible because units are very likely to die and lose that buff. What's really interesting about this card is that this is one of the few buff cards that doesn't require a colored hero. Most, it's like a green card, modify a green allied hero. Most red cards modify a red allied hero. But this, you can cast it on anything, other colors, it doesn't have to be a hero, it could be a creep. So this makes it super, super versatile, especially for multicolored decks. Does that mean it's good enough to make its way into most decks? I mean, it might be. +2 armor is enough to make your melee creeps win versus their melee creeps. It's kind of that magic number. 2 armor is just enough to make your melee creeps immune to damage, so they're guaranteed to win those exchanges. And I mean, it's fairly cheap. You can play this on turn 1. You can play it on anything. It's just so insanely versatile. It's got a lot of potential for that reason. Next up is Fog of War. This is a 4-cost blue spell. Each enemy has a 50% chance of being disarmed this round. So this could be fairly useful in buying time, especially if you're playing against really heavy hitting decks. Like there's Axe on the field, there's Thunderhides on the field, then this can potentially buy you a bunch of time. There's also a chance it can do absolutely nothing. That's the whole thing about this coin toss. Sometimes it's going to be incredible value. Sometimes it's going to just bend you over a barrel and do absolutely nothing. So is it worth playing? I feel like you're really better off taking Cheating Death. Cheating Death is kind of like the better version of this card because for 1 mana more, you get the effect basically every single turn. However, since this is in blue, it's a bit more advantageous for blue because blue doesn't put out very, very strong creeps, strong units, so they can't rely on a wide and beefy board to block hits. So Fog of War gives them an option to survive damage or avoid damage without putting units on the field, just through a spell. So for that reason, I feel like blue decks might want to run this, but I think some people will probably prefer a much more permanent option. Though I guess it is worth mentioning that if you've got just 1 blue hero in a lane and 3 Fogs of War, you can potentially just lock down a lane for 3 or more turns. Just Fog of War, Fog of War, Fog of War, which will buy you the time to win other lanes. So I mean, it could be good. I think in general though, you're probably better off going for options that are gonna kill the board, gonna take out those threats like Annihilation, just because then you don't have to worry about it next turn. Next up is Fractured Timeline. This is a 2-cost blue improvement. Before the action phase, give a random card in opponent's hand +1 lock. Now, if you're not familiar, lock means basically you just can't play that card for however many turns it's locked. So every single time you come to this lane, just 1 random card in the opponent's hand won't be playable that turn. So for that reason, you're almost always going to want to play this in the first lane rather than the second or the third lane. Because, I mean, if it's in the third lane and it locks a card, then it's only going to lock the card just for the rest of that turn, which isn't very meaningful. So this is definitely a lane 1 option every single time. Is it worth using? I don't know. +1 lock isn't that great, especially since it's so incredibly easy to fill your hand with cards through the item deck, right? If you just fill up your hand with a bunch of super cheap cards, just like 3-cost, 4-cost, 5-cost gold items, then Fractured Timeline isn't really going to affect you. It's like, oh no, I can't use Town Portal Scroll for 1 turn. No big deal. I'll just play my other creatures, my other units that I want to play. So I feel like unless you're playing a deck that's centered around lock and getting as much locks as possible, then I don't think this is very strong. Though, because locks stack, if you have other cards that lock up their deck, then potentially you can really interfere with the enemy's turn and just make it so they can't play cards, because some critical card keeps getting interfered. You got so many different locks and so many different cards, they just can't play what they want to play. Also worth mentioning that lock is incredibly powerful against combo decks, because the way combo decks usually work is you need, 4 or 5 cards to pull off your combo, and if you don't have one of those cards, the combo doesn't work. And if you can just constantly keep 1 or 2 of those cards locked down, then that ruins the entire combo. So I think if combo becomes popular in the meta, then this card will be much more viable. Though I think if you want to focus on lock, there's probably better options, more permanent options, because locking a card for 1 turn just isn't super meaningful, but we'll see. Next up is Jasper Daggers. Equipped hero has +2 attack and pierce. This is for 7 gold. Of course, pierce means that your unit will ignore armor as they deal damage to units and potentially to towers with things like Vesture of the Tyrant. So I feel like this card does actually have a place in certain decks, because Vesture of the Tyrant, we know from beta players, is extremely popular. It's apparently a top tier item card. Obviously, also you're going to get some value out of this with heroes like Axe, Bristleback. I mean, if you attack into those and their armor doesn't amount to squat. But how often do you run into high armor heroes? Probably not super likely. I think the main appeal for an item like this is that it gives you an opportunity to pierce through Vesture of the Tyrant tower armor, or just, it's just sort of reliable, right? It's all about ensuring that you deal damage to whatever it is that you're attacking, and at a fairly cheap gold cost, it's not too hard to pick up. So if Vesture of the Tyrant becomes very popular in a lot of decks, which I think it will, then I definitely see this card being picked up in certain item decks. Next up, Marrowfell Brawler. 6 mana red creep, 6 attack, and 16 health. This is a beastly centaur. This dude is stronger than most heroes. This dude's stronger than even a lot of red heroes. If you compare him to Spin, which we just talked about, Spin has less attack, less health. Spin's got the passive, but just in terms of raw stats, the Marrowfell Brawler beats out a lot of red heroes. This is a ton of stats on the board. Probably even more useful than the Ogre Conscript. For sure, the 2 armor is great, but with 16 health, that's so much health, you don't really care that much about the armor, right? So I could see this being pretty popular in a lot of red decks, though I'm noticing red tends to be a little bit heavy at the 6 mana slot. We've got Berserker's Call, we have the Marrowfell Brawler, we have the Ogre Conscript, we have God's Strength. So I'm worrying that the 6 mana slot in red might be a little bit overly competitive. So while Marrowfell Brawler definitely packs a punch, the question is, does it pack enough of a punch to oust a bunch of the other 6 mana red cards out there? Next up, the red spell Risdon Standards. This is a 4-cost red card. Modify a red hero with after you play a red card. Give this hero and its allied neighbors +1 attack and +1 armor this round. So red has a bunch of super cheap cards, like Pick a Fight or Fight Through the Pain. So I think the idea with this card is that you play Risdon Standards on a red hero, then chain gun out a couple of red spells to get a pretty sizable buff on your red hero plus whoever's adjacent to him, and then smack into the tower for massive damage. So this is sort of like a combo piece, but past that, even outside of combo, it's just sort of a reliable way to get an extra damage, extra armor, because you don't have to have combo pieces to get a lot of value. Play Risdon Standard on a red hero, then play Marrowfell Brawler, just 1 red card, and that's +1 attack and +1 armor across 3 units, so +3 attack total and +3 armor total. For 1 card, that's actually a decent amount of stats to gain. So I think just in terms of raw value, this could be pretty popular. The question is, are you going to have the red spells to back it up? Next up is quite possibly the single worst card in all of Artifact. Watchtower is a 1-cost blue improvement Whenever an enemy improvement enters this lane, draw a card. So let's talk about why this card is so bad. I will say though that I like the art. The art's kind of cool. I dig it. It feels very Dota-esque, but let's talk about why this card is so bad. So first of all improvements that we know of can be cast into any lane. So if you play this in lane 1 and the opponent is in lane 1 and all they have is improvements, it doesn't even matter because they can just play those improvements from lane 1 into lanes 2 or 3 and avoid the card draw. Secondly, it's just so easy for the opponent to predict and avoid this effect. I mean, there's no way to surprise them. There's no gotcha moment. It's just, oh, okay, there's a Watchtower in that lane. I guess I'll just play the improvements in the other lane. No big deal. Third, the effect itself isn't even that strong. In order to even break even, the opponent has to play one improvement in that lane, which is already unlikely. So in order for you to actually gain value, they need to play 2 improvements in that lane, which is damn near impossible. I mean, just why would an enemy want to do that unless they're desperate? So I think this card is pretty bad. I don't think it's going to be popular at all. The only way that I could see this card actually getting any amount of play is if the Oath becomes exceptionally popular, because with the Oath, I believe the only cards you can play in a lane with the Oath are improvements and item cards. So the idea is the Oath is at the top of the meta. All black decks run the Oath. You just wait for the Oath to drop in a lane, then you play the Watchtower in that lane, and then inevitably that black player will have a bunch of other improvements to play into that lane, because that's kind of what the Oath is built around, and then you start getting value out of it there. But that's a lot of ifs. I just don't think this card's going to get much play at all because the effect is so bad. So don't pick this up. Don't play it in draft. Don't play it in constructed. Maybe play it if a long list of contingencies activate, and in this sort of like magical moment when improvement decks dominate the meta, then you can consider playing Watchtower. But past that, I wouldn't touch this card with the 10-foot pole. It's bad. All right, so those are my cards for today. I know these cards came out like yesterday, so I'm a little bit late with these, but I'm actually moving. I'm moving to a new house in like 3 or 4 days, and I'm constantly packing, so I'm a little bit swamped at the moment. So sorry about that. But past that, let me know what you thought about this video. Let me know which cards you liked, which ones you hate. Is there a card worse than Watchtower that we've seen so far? I challenge you to find one. There might be. I'd have to go through and check out the list. So share your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Dabacab out.